This TFMR podcast is brought to you by your friends at JM Bullion. Visit jmbullion.com for all your gold and silver bullion needs. Welcome back to your TF Metals Report podcast highlights for the week of April 10th through the 14th, 2023. Very interesting week in the precious metals, and we try to summarize the action every day with a daily podcast for subscribers at TF Metals Report. These podcast highlight shows just a small snippet, usually less than a minute, of the 20-minute podcast that we report every day for our members. On Monday, we took a close look at the chart of COMEX Silver, which has been in a very solid uptrend and remains in that uptrend even by Friday. Now, this trend isn't going to take it all the way to $100. It will fail eventually, but as the week began, still solidly in that uptrend, and that was one of the charts we took a look at Monday, April the 10th. Silver on the daily chart. You want to see a channel. Again, we'll take this as long as it wants to keep going. Maybe it'll only go to 26. Maybe 25 was as far as it was going to go from 21.50 when it began. Maybe it'll go all the way to 28 within this very narrow channel. I mean, you can really only fit, 5 or 6 days sideways in this? Kind of briefly looked like it broke out last Monday, and now we're back in it. But those are two perfectly parallel lines, catching 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 7 lows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8, 9 highs. Wow. So, again, it's not going to hold forever. However, with 24.50 having been stout resistance in December and January, and 24.50 as of tomorrow being the lower end of this boundary, man, if for any reason they try to wash it out tomorrow to 24.50, that might be a pretty good trading opportunity in the short term, just to see, catch lightning in a bottle and bounce off that lower bound and start moving higher again. Of course, if you're going to track the precious metals, you better keep an eye on the dollar index every day, as the high-frequency trading machines often buy the metals and sell the dollar, or buy the dollars and sell the metals. Early in the week, they were buying the metals and selling the dollar, and the dollar was falling toward very important support, breaking down through the 102 and the 101 levels, eventually headed toward what may be a double bottom with the lows back in early February. We weren't there yet, but the chart had our attention, and that was one of the things we discussed on Tuesday. 101.5 or so, very important support level back in January with the false breakdown and then a reversal in early February. Came down to that level early last week and a bounce. I've given you a new trend line, but I've drawn it really skinny just to show you how much confidence I have in it, but nonetheless, it does connect 3 points. Dollar reaction tomorrow to all of the CPI stuff is going to be the key. So watch it closely. If you've been following along to these podcast highlights every week, or if you've been reading the public articles I post at Sprott Money each week, then you know copper is a very big point of interest here in 2023. Goldman Sachs projects global above-ground stockpiles could fall to 0 by this August, just 4 months from now. What will that do to the price of copper? And if copper breaks out and heads higher, what will that do to silver? So we're keeping a close eye on copper, and that was one of the charts we talked about on Wednesday, April the 12th. And then finally, I thought I'd show you copper, because copper's been up the last couple of days. Now, I'm not sure where the downtrend arrow is. I mean, the lower one was the one that we thought it was breaking out of, then it fell below, and now it's back above. Or you draw it, you move the goalpost, you move it, from that peak in January to the peak a couple of weeks ago, and we're getting right. Anyway, I don't know. I think 415 horizontally is more important. For the obvious reasons. You can see since the beginning of February, tried to get above 415, came right back down. Tried to get above 415, 1st of March, came right back down. Tried to get above 415 a couple weeks ago, came right back down. Give me above 415 and then 420, and we'll really have something. As you know, I'm extremely bullish copper, and I'm very excited to see what the impact of dwindling copper supplies are going to have on silver as we go through the summertime and into the fall. Anyway, we keep watching this price, and it's trying to turn back higher, as you can see on this chart. Our always free and public Thursday conversation podcast with our old friend Alistair McLeod, who's the head of research at Gold Money. Alistair does great work, and you should follow his work at goldmoney.com. Look for the research tab. He posts an article at least once a week. Like I said, he's been an old friend of TFMR. I've known him now for at least a dozen years. And it's great to have him stop by because he so willfully shares his expertise and his wisdom about the precious metals markets. You should go to the TF Metals Report homepage and find the link. It's free again for everybody to listen to. It's about 25 minutes. You will greatly benefit from listening. Here's just about a minute or so of what Alistair had to say on Thursday.
I'm sensing a shortage of available physical stock. I mean, what we're seeing, which is interesting, is that nowadays the two largest mine producers are China, closely followed by Russia. Now, Russia is stepping up its production, and it anticipates overtaking China in the not too distant future. They're investing in new gold mines and all the rest of it, and this is so. I think between them, looking ahead a year or two, you're probably going to get something like 900 tons of gold coming out of those two nations alone, being withheld from the global markets, where annual mine production is in the order of sort of 2 to 2,500 tons, including the stuff that's being withheld from us. Of course, with an above-ground stock of around about 200,000 tons, these flows are not the whole story. They're only a small part of the whole story. And I think what we're seeing, which I think is very important, is the way in which the ownership of gold is being stepped up by the central banks. I mean, there's no doubt that they're voting against fiat currencies, not their own, but other fiat currencies. And so principally, we're going back to the dollar and the euro and sterling and the yen. They're voting against them with their feet by buying gold. I mean, what do you sell to buy gold? You sell paper currencies. And also the other thing we're seeing is that I think the more conservative elements, if you like, in the general public are beginning to accumulate gold in small quantities, relatively small quantities individually, but of course it all mounts up.
And on Friday, April the 14th, gold took a beating, down about $35, turned what had been a positive week into a negative week, actually down $12 on the week. Very close to breaking out, as you can see on this weekly chart, finishing the week in the front month June contract at about 2020. Now, on the bright side, that's the first time gold's ever had two consecutive weekly closes north of $2,000 an ounce. On the downside, probably a little more weakness to come next week. Some economic data that, well, we'll see if it's any stronger than people might be expecting, kind of creating kind of a mini version of what we had to experience back in February. Oh no, now the Fed's going to hike again in May. Whatever, let them do whatever they're going to do. The damage has been done. The economy's headed toward recession. Even the Fed themselves are admitting that. Rate cuts and more QE are coming. The longer they wait to start that rate cutting process, the more severe the rate cuts are going to be. Just the opposite of what happened when they were saying inflation was transitory. They waited too long and had to jack rates quickly. Same thing's going to happen now in reverse. And days like today, with gold down to finish the week, are really just a bump in the road. Any pullback just creates a dip to buy. Thank you for listening to the TF Metals Report podcast highlights. We'll have another one of these summaries for you next week.